Today I'm going to be talking about Alright, after 13 years, James Cameron has finally released the highly anticipated Avatar 2, and the plot for it is pretty much this. Jake Sully lives with his newfound family formed on the planet of Pandora, but once a familiar threat returns to finish what was previously started, Jake must work with Neytiri and the army of the Na'vi race to protect their planet. Alright, let's get into the good parts of this movie, and the first thing I'm going to say is that the story for this movie is honestly much better than the first one. I think that the first movie did a very good job of making us care about Jake Sully and Neytiri, but this movie not only makes us care about the couple, they also make us care about their kids, and they also make us care about the new people that they have to deal with, and they also make us kind of care about the villain for this movie as well. Another great thing that I'll say about this movie is the pacing. When I saw the runtime for this movie, I was like, oh my god, I don't even know if I'm going to finish this thing. But in the first movie, I'd say the pacing was really well done, and in this movie, it's no different. And honestly, the whole movie is really great to watch. I never felt bored at all. James Cameron, in all of the movies I've seen from him, he's never really had a movie that was poorly paced, and Avatar 2 is going to be in that collection of movies as well. Another thing that I liked about the movie are the kids in this movie. Obviously, anytime that kids are in such a big budget movie like this, it's always been 50-50 on whether or not they're good. But in this movie, they're not only good, they're great. And I really am happy about that, because these kids, from what I've been seeing from this movie, are going to be probably the main characters for Avatar 3, 4, 5, and apparently 6 and 7 eventually. But also in this movie, the new Na'vi people that we meet, although, they're not really that complex of characters, they're kind of iffy at the beginning because they know Jake Sully's history and they don't want to, get involved in that. Eventually, they are able to let them in. And I wasn't really too fascinated with, the new Na'vi people, but I was more fascinated with the world that they were living in, because, oh my God, it is one of the most visually stunning things that I've seen in my life. Another good thing that I'm going to say about this movie is the action scenes in this movie. And by the way, this movie is surprisingly brutal. I think in the third act of this movie, a dude's arm literally comes off, which was insane. People are getting arrows, the human characters are getting arrows to the face, to the eye, although they don't show any blood in those characters. I'm still surprised with how brutal they got with this, since this is a Disney project at the end of the day, and the main target audience for this movie is families and kids, so it'll be interesting to see how kids react to that, because I know the parents are not going to be happy with their kids seeing, people get arrows to their face. And the action scenes themselves are obviously great, but I think the reason why I cared about the action so much in this movie is because the movie did such a good job of making me care about every single character in this movie. And because you're emotionally invested in the characters, then you care more about the action, because the action really isn't that much different from any other movie. But because we care so much, that's what makes the action great. Another thing that I liked about this movie is the chance of death for the kids in this movie. I'm not going to spoil anything in this movie, but what I will say is that the looming threat of death in this movie is around pretty much every single character in this movie. And I'm glad that the kids kind of got that as well, because once again, when kids are like the big part in a big movie, it seems like they get a lot of plot armor. Or even TV shows, I'm not going to mention any certain shows, but you know what I'm talking about. But in this movie, it feels like any of the kids could die at any moment, which once again goes with the action and makes us care more about them as well, because that there's a chance that they could probably die. Another great thing that I'll say about this movie is the villain. I will say that he's not much different from the first one, but in this one, he is given a little bit more depth, which in the fact that he has an emotional connection with one of the characters. I'm not going to say who it is, but it is interesting to see how he deals with that, because this character ends up kind of changing him. But once again, he's not given that much more depth than he was in the first one. But it is somewhat of an improvement. The final thing I'll say before I get into my criticisms is that this might be the best CGI movie that I've ever seen in my life. And it's so good to the point that you forget that the Na'vi people are not real people. Like, these are just people spent hours of their life making these characters and creating the ocean and creating all these different characters and getting all the certain places of their body right. Like, people spent hours of their lives doing this, and my God, big round of applause to James Cameron's crew, because once again, this might be the best CGI movie that I've ever seen in my life. But as great as Avatar 2 is, I did have a lot of problems with it, and the first one is that the humans in this movie are unbearable. And when I mean unbearable, I mean all of the letters in the word are capitals, because oh my God, they're just not funny. Like, there's these certain two main human characters that are on the villain side that they're trying to make them like try to be kind of comedy relief. And I know one of the guys works with Taika Waititi a lot, but that humor just didn't seem to translate for this movie, because the entire time, anytime that they were on screen, I was stone-faced. Not a single ounce of laughter was going to come out of my body. The next criticism is obviously kind of what I mentioned with the villain, is that he's not given that much more depth than he is in the first one. He really just has two emotions in this movie. One is, I'm going to come after Jake Sully and kill him. The second one is, oh, I have this new character that I have to take care of. And even though I'm not really familiar with this character that much, I'm still going to protect him. I don't know. The villain for this movie was, once again, as a villain, he was great. When he was coming after Jake Sully and trying to kill his family, he was great. But when they tried to give him more family depth, I guess you could say, more of a personality other than just being a generic villain, it just didn't work for me. Another criticism that I have for this movie is that Sigourney Weaver is playing a 14-year-old. Yeah, I just said that. And that's not really a problem, but when you add into the fact that the other kid characters in this movie are played by actual kids, and then you have someone who I don't know the age of, but I'm assuming in her 50s to maybe 60s playing a teenager, that becomes really noticeable really quickly, because all the other kids sound like teenagers, and then this 14-year-old sounds like she pays car payments. Another criticism that I have for this movie is that it is a very slow start. Like, the first 20 to 40 minutes of this movie, I was in that theater thinking, all right, I'm probably not even going to like it that much more than the first one. But once again, once we get introduced to the new Na'vi people, I think that's when the movie finally gets going. But my God, the first 20 to 40 minutes are a slow burn. The final criticism I have before I give my score for this movie is that Jake Sully and Neytiri get sidelined in this movie. This movie's mainly about the kids in this movie, because like I said, it feels like they're setting them up for Avatar 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But it feels like they kind of forgot about Jake Sully and Neytiri. Don't get me wrong, they still get a decent amount of screen time, but you can tell that they're not really the main characters for this movie. And once again, they were great when they were on screen, but I just wish we could have got more of them. And overall, guys, although I had a lot of great things to say about Avatar 2, I also had a lot of negatives. But for some reason, those negatives didn't seem to affect my viewing experience. And I'm going to go ahead and give Avatar: The Way of Water an 8.5 out of 10. Have you guys seen Avatar 2? Did you like it as much as I did? Did you think it wasn't that much better than the first one? Let me know in the comments. And those are my thoughts on that.